Hi there, I'm Steve Smith, CEO of Airlink, and thank you for joining me today for another episode of FlightPath, where we highlight innovation, deliver insight, guidance, and lessons in best practice to people working in the humanitarian response and disaster logistics space from experienced organizational leaders. My guest today was appointed Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Polar Air Cargo Worldwide in July 2018. But his impressive resume also includes a former Vice President Aviation Express for DHL Asia Pacific role, and prior to that, he held a number of senior management roles inside the Lufthansa Group. In short, I would say that there's very little about aviation and the air freight business that my guest does not know. So please welcome Lars Winkelbauer.
Thank you very much, Steve, and pleasure to be talking to you today.
Yeah, good to see you. So, Lars, I don't think I can remember a time when air freight was so critical to the functioning of supply chains and in the delivery of medical supplies as it is in the current COVID-19 environment. And so I'm really grateful that you would spend some time. I know you're a very busy individual right now. Maybe if you wouldn't mind, we could start by talking a little bit about your business, just for those listeners that may not be familiar with Polar.
Sure. So as you already said, obviously my name is Lars. I'm the EVP and COO of Polar Air Cargo. We are actually an all-cargo airline, which means we don't fly any passengers. We are all about the cargo business and have so for the last 25 years. We're a U.S. flag carrier, and the way that we are set up is we are actually a joint venture between the Atlas Air Group, as well as DHL Express and Atlas Air Worldwide Holdings being the majority owner. Main or key areas of operation, I should say, for us is really the Trans-Pacific. So we're connecting the key markets of Nagoya, Narita, Taipei, Shenzhen, PVG, Hong Kong, Incheon to the US. And we're operating an entire, as I said already earlier, all cargo, i.e. freighter fleet, 747-400s, -8s, and 767s across our fleet. And we have been in Asia since the early 1990s. And our goal is really to overall to connect cargo. And in this case, what our main focus is to connect the freight forwarders, which are our customers, and use our network to move their logistics shipments, mainly airport to airport, but we're also supplying quite a bit of surface type of, and by surface type I mean trucking, lift within the US and points within Asia.
Interesting. So, I mean, it's really quite a, if you're not familiar with the sector, it's really quite a complex business, actually. You mentioned freight forwarders, and we don't need to go into those too much further, but, it's a really quite a complex business. So, I mean, one of the things I was going to ask you if I can, many of our listeners will be leaders from the humanitarian relief and disaster logistics sector. So in theory, most of them should understand what a freight forwarder is. But for some of those that may not be familiar with the air cargo world, maybe you could give us sort of a simple overview of how the market functions, how it differs from commercial aviation, the passenger side, and in particular, I think just listeners would be interested to understand how the pricing models work in this current environment.
The more supply that you have on any given lane, usually that has an effect, on the price at the end of the day, and it also depends on the type of service level that you want. So do you want standby, or do you want guaranteed uplift and express? So I think what most importantly here is for this particular question is and a lot of people have talked about this in the press. Well, why have the prices risen over time? A lot of cargo, and people do not realize the amount. And I've seen different numbers out there, and I don't want to speculate, but let's say that a lot of the cargo, even on the Trans-Pacific, because they have for example 777s flying there, which can carry a very nice cargo load in the belly. We're transporting cargo in the bellies of the aircraft, and they were obviously specifically on the Transpac lots of flights on a daily basis, which basically, and there are different numbers out there, but from what I've seen, that on the Trans-Pacific, the passenger and therefore the belly type of capacity was cut by roughly 85%. That was essentially the amount of flights that we saw declining. So there are different numbers out there. I believe Seabury was one of them that reported something in the neighborhood of 85%. So now putting that into context. So on one hand, belly cargo capacity is declining,
yes.
Which means you're taking now supply out of the market. Obviously, freighter capacity was still relatively stable, and people were adding a little bit capacity on the freighter side. But now, at the same time, the demand was spiking as well. Now, why was the demand spiking? Well, obviously, there was now a lot of demand for what we call PPE, personal protective equipment. And this gear was being pushed out into the market. And, we were talking earlier about the type of service, standby versus guaranteed and express. Well, obviously, this is life-saving type of equipment. And everybody was expecting this to move in the fastest way possible. Ideally yesterday. That was usually what we heard from a lot of customers. Well, we want this to move ideally yesterday. And all of this, these two things happening at the same time: demand spiking, capacity going down, essentially drove up the price in a very dynamic market. And you see that in many other markets as well, where there's a supply shortage while the demand is increasing, that is pushing up the type of pricing.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you. So I mean, this has obviously put a lot of pressure on the dedicated cargo air freighters, freighter market, and as you've just said. But when you're looking at and around the industry, or not the industry, but just in the media, no sector has been hit, or few industries, I guess, have been hit as hard as the aviation sector by COVID-19. What has been one of the biggest impacts on your business?
Sure. I mean, I guess one thing that I would say, cargo is actually now more critical than ever, right? It was critical already in the past, but now it is more critical than ever, and especially with the decrease on passenger flight, which is what we just talked about, which, with the decrease in passenger flight, obviously, the belly space started to evaporate, and cargo carriers are now more than ever a needed part of the supply chain in order to move these critical life-saving, shipments and supplies around the world. As we have seen, quite reportedly in the press, as you said, yes, there has been disruption in the airline industry, as most of the countries have had these travel restrictions, these travel advisories out there that were in place to essentially delay the spread of the virus, which resulted in those passenger frequencies being pulled down, and also cargo slowed. At least in the beginning, this was pre-Chinese New Year. So in the early part of January, started to slow significantly when the factories started to kind of shut down, and it continued much longer than the normal traditional season. So we would have normally expected that by mid-February we would have been up and running again in terms of a full schedule, after coming out of the Chinese New Year. And in fact, we didn't run a full schedule until March the 9th. So more than a month and a half almost later than when you saw the traditional Chinese New Year coming down, so to speak. So the impact there was, of course, much longer closures, factory closures that we have seen. And additionally, this is not related to the commercial piece, But additionally, of course, the operational environment now has become much more challenging, and that's an impact on the industry as a whole, but also on the cargo side. So the impact there is that because of these various country regulations and the lack of passenger space, or passenger flights, I should say, it was much more difficult to move crews around, because again, we are freighter airlines.
I heard that.
We are an all freighter airline. So in order for our crews to move around, we rely on our own aircraft, and two, we rely on passenger flights. And if you don't have those, it's getting very difficult to move crew around, along with all these different ever-changing country restrictions. And then last but not least, operationally on the ground, we were also facing challenges with different regulations and changes on what we call, specifically on the Chinese side, when it comes to customs regulations. And these are really have been put in place in order to guarantee the quality of PPE.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, just speaking with some other of our friends, understanding about some of these regulations, irrespective of where it is, but just the complexity it has driven in your business around repositioning these crews. And obviously the crew can't just stay with the plane forever. At some point, there's certain parameters that need to be to looked at. But when we thinking about again the aviation industry and what it's going to look like after this crisis, there's some speculation that cargo will be far bigger. It will be a far bigger component of the airline business model. I suppose we're referring sort of more to passengers. Obviously, dedicated cargo airlines are already focused there. What are your thoughts on that in terms of the aviation sector as a whole?
Yeah, and I've Steve, naturally I've seen that speculation as well, and I think that businesses everywhere will be changed as a result of this pandemic. I think for air freight, I would really point to two major developments and we have touched upon some of these already in various forms. So on one hand, I would say that there are various forecasts out there that have predicted that passenger travel or passenger demand will not fully return to pre-COVID-19 levels for the next 2 to 3 years. And so, devoted cargo carriers will have a much longer opportunity in the near to medium term to capture a larger share of the cargo demand, because there's simply not a lot belly space out there, at least not for a while. And on the other hand, the urgent need to transfer. I lost you there for a second. Sorry. The urgent need of moving these very time sensitive, massive amounts of PPEs and other medical equipment and supplies at some point in time, at least we hope, I think you hope as well, will dissipate. Yeah, so it will no longer be needed. So, and those goods, if you plan it correctly, can then at that point in time either move on ocean or be sourced locally. So demand, at least to some degree, will start to, at least, I believe, normalize. However, with that said, at the same time, again, speaking of demand, e-commerce has been a driver for our industry for the last 5 to 10 years, and is continuing to grow. And if nothing that has come out of this pandemic, a lot of people were sitting at home. A lot of people kept ordering, and I presume that will also continue in the near future. So that's going to help again from a demand point of view for cargo to become and continue to become more important, and for all cargo carriers to capture a larger share of the market. I think overall it's fair to assume that PAX carriers will carry less cargo simply because there are fewer airplanes, passenger airplanes that is. flying. So air cargo carriers will be proportionately, carry more cargo than PAX airplanes in the future.
Yeah.
At least in near term.
Yeah, sure, sure. But and I suppose that one might say that because the passenger demand is going to take so much time to recover and confidence in flying again, that perhaps the passenger airlines might be incentivized to look at cargo perhaps more than they have in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah, so very interesting. All right, well, let me ask you, sort of change tack a little bit. You're clearly and obviously a successful leader of your organization and have been for a long time now. What do you think some of the most important attributes are for someone leading in a crisis situation like the one we're in now?
Well, I think if one word comes to mind, is certainly flexibility, right? First and foremost, I think flexibility is key because everything changes on a dime, on a daily basis. We had to deal with things, like those country restrictions that I mentioned to you about that we never thought of and never thought were possible. And no one right now really has the luxury on insisting on things to progress as they always have, right? So flexibility, I think, is very very key because air cargo in general is in the business of providing solutions, and in order to provide solutions, you have to be flexible. I think the second key thing is, and it has personally to me always been very, very important, and that is employees first. Yeah, employees must be protected at all costs. And the reason for that is that without the employees being protected, they don't feel safe, they may not come to work, and things might not happen at the speed that they need to happen. Because let's even talk about simple things like a warehouse, for example, right? We rely on everyone to do their part, whether it's in the warehouse, whether it is in reservation, whether it is in sales, whether it's anywhere in between, whether it's the pilots. With any of these pieces not falling into place, it will disrupt the entire logistics chain and the flow of how it works. So what we did very, very early on is provide, should take a step back. First, we listened to our employees. We said, what is on your mind? What do you need in order to feel safe to come to work every day? Yeah. What do you need? And things like, we sanitized, all the offices, all the standards that you heard about. We followed all the WHO as well as CDC guidelines, and we early on provided all of our staff that could not practice effective social distancing, with gloves and masks to make sure that they felt comfortable coming to work every day. And I think that was really, one of the key things when it comes to having a successful organization, where you make sure that your employees feel safe on a daily basis because you rely on them. And then lastly, trust your people. Empower your team. You can't be everywhere all the time, and things change so quickly. You do not have the luxury to question everything. You do not have the luxury to be everywhere where you need to be, because it's a 24/7 organization and operation, day in, day out. And you have to empower your team to make the right decisions, and if necessary, also fail. It's okay to make a mistake. If they're not, that's one big also misnomer and misconception. If they're not allowed to make mistakes, then they will never be able to kind of grow as a person, as an employee, and they will be afraid to make mistakes. And if they are afraid to make mistakes, usually processes break down because they are afraid to take a decision. So those are really, for me, the three key attributes that I believe you need to have as a leader, specifically when it comes to these sort of crises.
That's interesting. I mean, we talk about airlines and air cargo and COVID-19 pandemic and organizations' earnings, all these things. I mean, it all at some point, if at almost every point, all just boils down to people, right?
Yeah.
Airlines are people, and they're trying to do their jobs, they're trying to feed their families, and they're just, and I think, we talk a lot about the healthcare professionals, wonderful individuals and absolutely frontline heroes. But I think also on the aviation sector, the folks that you talked about in the warehouse. I mean, those people are also critical individuals, flight crews, frontline responders, and so we should celebrate those. I know you do. So talking about your staff and sort of the organization, I mean. Tell me, I think you've already covered a couple of things, but over the course of the pandemic, what are you most proud of?
I think again, coming back to the employees. So let me answer the question this way. So first of all, very similar to your previous question, I said, our employees and our extended teams, throughout our partners, because those we should never forget either, because we rely heavily on our partners and vendors as well, in addition to our own employees, and they make the business happen and deliver for our customers day in, day out, right? And I think it's so important to know the personal impact on your teams, and in this case my team, right? And the concessions that they make on a daily basis, personal concessions, as well as you really have to be flexible with them, because you're only together, right? At the end of the day, we can manage through the day to day with some pieces of, I always call it, humanity, right? And our overall goal is always never forget the people, right? That's how we phrase our entire term of how we want to deal with our people. And there, I would say, is to your question, I couldn't be more proud of my team, or of our team within the organization. And this goes from our employees in Hong Kong to Anchorage to Los Angeles to Kentucky and everywhere in between. Because really everybody is in this together. Everybody is working together to find ways in order to deliver for our customers at the end of the day, and that's something really something I couldn't be more proud of. And in some degrees, this also extend, of course, to things like our ground crews. They're all essential workers, on the front line, and bringing all this critical cargo from point A to point B, and making sure that this critical PPE arrives at final destination. So to me, that's all part of the game, right? We very often forget that we're moving, not only electronics, not only laptops, not only who knows what, right? But certainly we also move life-saving equipment, and somebody is depending on this. So not only am I proud of my team, but I'm also proud of us as an industry, of how important we are to humanity at the end of the day, right? We are truly doing something that is good for humanity at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think that's right. It's a great organization for sure. And so, changing tack a little bit, putting yourselves, we're talking about how, many of our listeners will be folks in the humanitarian sector. So if you're putting yourself in the shoes of a nonprofit NGO leader and trying to anticipate response to upcoming disasters, which we know are probably going to happen and continue in COVID-19 needs, and knowing what you know about what's happening in logistics sphere, air freight, what sort of simple advice would you give in terms of their logistics planning, budgeting, all the associated considerations to still be able to operate in this very sort of strange and sort of skewed market.
Right. So obviously there are disasters you absolutely cannot predict, right? There's always natural disasters that come up, which that you have no time to react. It happens, and then you have to react. But there are certain things where I'm thinking of typhoon season or hurricane season that happen generally every year. Of course, the timing is different. But for those sort of disasters, I would recommend or suggest a bit more pre-planning. And what I mean by that is anticipate some of this demand. I know this is difficult, but already move some sort of equipment that you might need as equipment and supplies, and pre-stage that closer to where the disaster, or at least the region where the disaster may actually occur. So in the case of hurricanes, it might be Miami. In the case of typhoons, it might be the Philippines, right? So you get as close as possible. And then the local transportation, meaning it might now be only a shorter regional flight rather than a long-term international, rather than a long-haul international flight, which obviously is much more expensive. So try to the extent possible, do a little bit pre-planning if that's workable, because that will save you some cost. The second piece is, I would say when it comes to airlines, talk to airlines early. Sign up your partners early, because usually throughout the year, when especially during the shoulder season or the general off season, we are not that busy, so there might be an opportunity to work with airlines in order to pre-stage. And at the same time, you could build a relationship with the airlines who may want to get involved. There are a lot of airlines out there, I'm sure, that want to get involved, but don't know how to, or haven't really thought about it because they were busy. So I think that's a good approach. And then thirdly, think also of partnering with freight forwarders. There are a lot of smaller mom and pop freight forwarders that have a great network that want to do something for the community as a whole and be good corporate citizens, but again, never knew how to get involved. And that would be my suggestion also to try and engage with those stakeholders as well, because there are many out there.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And as you know, with our relationship between Airlink and Polar, Airlink obviously works to help that interaction. And I should declare that to our listeners that Polar's been extremely generous to Airlink and our NGO partners during this COVID-19 crisis and before. With initially some shipments to Wuhan, China, when in the early days of COVID-19, and now back to the US. Given the demand for air cargo at that moment, Lars, you didn't have to give us space on the planes free of charge. That was very generous of you, and so I'd be fascinated to learn a little bit more about your attitude and business attitude toward charitable giving, and sort of what else you've been doing during COVID-19, if you would.
Sure. No, thank you. Well, obviously, first and foremost, I said at the very beginning, Polar is a U.S. flag carrier. However, we should not forget that we are a global company. And we have people that work for us from all over the world, right? So we are really, citizens of the world, and therefore, we want to get involved and do the right thing. Again, for all people that are concerned. And you mentioned Wuhan in the beginning, and then of course when things shifted, we shifted over to the U.S. and we helped with the U.S. relief effort. Pandemics, impacts all of us, right? And we need to, and we want to do our part to help at Polar. Our employees, our customers, our families, no one is immune to what's happening right now or may happen in the future. And obviously to assist, you already said, we partnered with Airlink to help out, and with other organizations to help get critical cargo where it is most needed. And also, as you said, we started in February shipping PPE equipment and other supplies to Wuhan. And now we're moving the same kind of cargo in the other direction, where it is needed, from manufacturers in China, out to the US, where it's needed in hospitals and for first responders. And I can give you some examples. So in February, we also did work with the US-based alumni of Peking University, collecting supplies for patients in Wuhan. So Polar provided and transported in partnership with Vision Logistics the movement and the processing of those items to China. Then in March, we supported obviously Airlink, and I believe that was about 7 tons of PPEs, mainly respirator masks, surgical masks, and isolation gowns, from Los Angeles to Shanghai. And again, we partnered again with also a forwarder, with what's Vision Logistics, who helped setting it all up in terms of documentation and customs clearance and everything. And in addition, also, we have been working with an organization called the Guardians of the Angels, based in Los Angeles, who were raising funds in the US to bring critical PPE shipments from manufacturers around the world, some of them in China, to the US for hospitals, mainly for hospitals. So, for example, Mount Sinai in New York, we were able to move a lot of shipments, and naturally, Mount Sinai and New York was obviously ground zero for the outbreak here in the United States. And we were able to do quite a few shipments with them as well. And then finally, we donated our own masks that we had for our own operations to doctors and first responders at Mount Sinai as well.
Wow, pretty cool. I mean, so just out of interest, I mean, between yourselves and within the Atlas Group, how many flights do you have going a day? I know that's sort of a generic question, but I mean, you have a lot of flights going every day, right?
Yes. Well, I mean, obviously, you mean just for the relief effort, or you mean just in general?
Well, maybe both. Just as context, I mean, you guys are playing a big role, right? And so, just interested in the amount of cargo and flights that you're operating right now.
Yes. I mean, I wouldn't be able to speak for the Atlas side, but certainly on the Polar side, these are literally dozens and dozens of flights, depending on what routes you're talking about, per day that we're operating on a scheduled service basis. So there's quite a lot of capacity flying between these different lane segments.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Lars, thanks so much. I mean, I always try and finish on a positive note. So, looking to the future, sort of the outshoots or upshoots of this COVID-19 extraordinary period in human history. What sort of positive things can we take away, would you say?
Well, I think in my mind, there are always positive things in any crisis, and certainly what I have observed is a few things, but most notably, I find that people, at least in general, they've really risen to the occasion, and by what I mean by that is they're caring about their neighbor. They seem to be more kinder to people. They realize that again, it's not a slogan. We are all in this together. And they genuinely want to help, and it doesn't matter what country you're from or what ethnicity you are. That everybody's in this, and it's affecting everybody. So to me, the positive out of that is really that people have stepped up and realized that we all kind of global citizens. And the second piece is obviously that I am personally very excited because I work in an industry where I actually have the opportunity to make a direct impact, and by transporting these life-saving, life-saving goods, and keep the global supply chain going, whether it is for life-saving goods or whether it is for anything else that is required within the worldwide supply chain. So I'm immensely proud of that, and certainly be extremely happy to be part of this industry.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you sure are making a massive impact, and thanks so much for all of your hard work. I think I think that's all we had time for today, and I really want to thank my guest Lars Winkelbauer for joining us, and to thank him and his staff at Polar for their tireless work and dedication to helping those communities in crisis across the globe, not just now, but throughout the years. And I know how grateful our NGO partners have been. I know how grateful we at Airlink are for your partnership. And so until our next episode, this is Steve Smith wishing you and your families well. Goodbye.